cause for concern because the expansionism is right at our doorstep. China, because of the actions of the Sri Lankan government, is right at the doorstep. It is within firing distance of India, and this is a huge cause for concern. And not just that, Sri Lanka now is fast on that highway to becoming a vassal state and to becoming economically dominated and controlled by the Chinese, especially who under the CCP leadership have this habit and have this entire pattern of totally converting regions that they take under their control into their own cultural lineage, totally demographically erasing the culture roots of that particular area which they dominate, and then repopulate or convert them into Mandarin speaking population. So this is something which Sri Lanka is now staring as a possibility over the next 2 decades, and of course it has huge security implications for India. Let's try and understand what happened as China colonizes Hambantota and the entire colonizational route that the Chinese have undertaken. Manoj Gupta, our investigations editor, bringing us these concerns where the Chinese now will have control of not just the Hambantota port for the next 99 years. They also now have their toehold or perhaps control of part of the port of Colombo too. Now, if media reports are supposed to suggest, are to be believed, then the current disposition is actually wanting to sell off some of the heritage sites of the Sri Lankans, of Sri Lanka, also to China-backed or China-owned companies. Now, that's another aspect. Now, what's going to happen in these regions? You will have to have a passport to enter these zones. This will be totally under Chinese control. The currency of transaction will be the yuan. It's the Sri Lankan parliament that has enacted this law. There are plenty of concerns that stand out as we look at this. And of course, it is just within 290 kilometers of Kanyakumari. So the Chinese warships will dock, port, and then China has a station right there at the tip of India to monitor and open its radars up right at across the Indian heartland. So Sri Lankan import-export under direct Chinese control. Ports made part of the BRI. That is, so Sri Lanka goes the Pakistan way, absolutely. And fate similar to the port of Gwadar and Port Qasim. Also, it opens the gates for intrusion and influence in the Sri Lankan capital, Colombo. There's ethnoculturalism also will come through because there are reports, and we'll show you those visuals, where Tamil and Sinhala signages have been replaced with Mandarin signages. It also, Sri Lanka will be China's overseas province in the Indian Ocean. That's where it is building up to. Of course, the debt trap that intensifies and investments in road, rail, power infra, slowly they will just spread their tentacles and Sri Lanka will perform as a vassal state. That's where it is moving to. Changes, of course, in the regional geopolitical dynamics, which is going to be a huge impact. So let's dive in straight into the debate. Is China's expansionism actually now taking root with Hambantota? Let's dive into the debate. You can participate in the debate and also tell us what you feel. The hashtag is CCP Snares Sri Lanka, and the handle is @News18. The platform is Coup, where we encourage you to engage with us. Let's go across to our guest this evening, Krishmal Varnasurya, Sri Lanka Supreme Court. Krishmal Varnasurya, Sri Lanka Supreme Court lawyer, who's also fought the case against this entire bill and legislation, is with us. Krishmalji, let me just introduce our other panelists also. G. Parthasarthi, former diplomat with us. Major General Dhruv Katoch, Director, India Foundation with us. Andrew K.P. Leong, international and independent China strategist based in Hong Kong, is also with us. We're also just standing by for Dr. Tara Karta, former Director of National Security Council Secretariat, also to join us any moment now. But first, I'm going to start with Mr. Varnasurya. Okay, Dr. Tara Karta is also with us. Good evening to everyone. Now it's over to this very august panel, very informed panel. Let's try and understand the dynamics and what it implies. Mr. Varnasurya, first I'm going to come across to you. Tell us and explain to our viewers why you fought against this bill, what position you took, and why are you a concerned Sri Lankan today?
Yes, thank you, firstly, Anand, to your channel for inviting me, and a warm good evening to all our fellow panelists. My involvement in challenging of the bill, Anand, comes as counsel of the Supreme Court. I represented several petitioners and not just me. There were several petitions that were filed in the Supreme Court challenging the bill that was placed before Parliament. That is our constitutional process. Because unlike you in India and maybe in some states in America, we do not have post-enactment review. After a bill is made law, we can't review it. The only window that we have is that panel where when it's placed before the order paper of Parliament, we are given a certain amount of time to go and challenge it. So that's why not just us, even the Bar Association of Sri Lanka were petitioners in the Supreme Court, among several others, who challenged various provisions of the bill. What we saw was, as damaging was, I must say that I need to correct some of the, I was listening to you, Anand, as you started the program. There may be some misconceptions also that are attributed to the port city. I think that must be clear. But let me just explain as to why we challenged it. Whilst the petitioners that I represented, all former politicians and present politicians that came to court, whilst they were in agreement that Sri Lanka needed an economic boost, particularly with what the world is going through now. I mean, we are not going to even have aid from affluent countries, or who we have seen as affluent countries, because they themselves are grappling with economic issues. We understand the need for economic upliftment, but we found several provisions of the bill to be unconstitutional as opposed to vis-a-vis other Sri Lankans. For example, the equality provision, where there were some provisions which allowed port city residents and those authorized within the port city to have prominence when it came to litigation before courts. So one question we raised was, well, why not other Sri Lanka? Why should only those investors have priority? Similarly, there were other provisions which we can go into in detail later. But one important thing that we must realize now, Anand, is now this is law. Our window that we have in the Supreme Court is now passed. We have gone beyond that. The Supreme Court, the Lordship themselves, have suggested, after hearing our submissions, Attorney General gave several amendments that they proposed after hearing submissions. Now all that have been incorporated, we hope so, but I have not seen the law that have been enacted after the bill. So what we are now speaking of is a bill that we argued in the Supreme Court, but after it went to Parliament, the legislative process has now taken over, and they have now passed it into law. So we are yet to see the final act that have been passed.
But the bill, now we are given to understand, gives absolute Chinese control to the port of Hambantota. Correct me if I am wrong, that the currency for transaction is going to be the yuan, and that the Chinese will have authority and the Sri Lankan law will not apply. Is that true?
I believe is a misconception, Anand. This port city bill is nothing to do with the Hambantota port. The port city bill is to do with the reclaimed area of land that is adjacent to Colombo, the commercial capital. Hambantota port is right in the south of Sri Lanka. That's a different issue altogether.
Correct.
What we argued on the bill is the area of land that has been reclaimed by a public-private partnership with Chinese investment money, and that area of land is to be called the port city area, and that was demarcated and is going to be incorporated into the Colombo district, the administrative district of Colombo, and a commission is to engage in the administration of this port city area. So I believe there is a misconception about Chinese yuan being used. Yes, there is foreign currency. There is provision for foreign currency to be used within the port city area. However, we did raise this argument in the Supreme Court, but in the determination that the lordships have given, they have given mind to the fact that there are, at the moment, there are Sri Lankan citizens who are also earning in foreign currency. For example, airline pilots, airline crew members who derive an income in foreign currency, and therefore one cannot stop the income from being earned in a foreign currency. But it is, I think, a misconception to say that Chinese yuan is going to be used in the port city. I think that is a misconception.
Okay, so I understand that there is a port city bill and there's something which is happening off the port of Colombo. Like you said, there is reclaimed land with Chinese private-public partnership which is involved. The other aspect is the Hambantota port. How much control do the Chinese have actually got in appointment of commissions, appointment of administrative officials, and control of the proceedings? Which law will apply, Sri Lankan law or Chinese law? both at the port city in Colombo and also in Hambantota. And what is the freedom the Chinese have in terms of the use of the port of Hambantota? Mr. Varnasuri.
Sorry, you're posing the question to me. Yeah. Once again, I say what we argued in the Supreme Court, which I was of the opinion we were discussing today, was the Colombo Port City Bill. Now, Colombo Port City Bill has no connection to the Hambantota port that you were speaking of, which itself was an issue some time back.
Correct.
Yes, there is a Hambantota port, but the Colombo Port City Bill that we argued in the Supreme Court has no bearing on the Hambantota port that you're now speaking of. So therefore, Sri Lankan law applies, but yes, we had concerns when we went to the Supreme Court because there were several exemptions given. For example, when it came to tax regime, there were several clauses in the bill that we argued that allowed tax exemptions, including the Inland Revenue provisions, the VAT, value-added tax provisions, the Finance Act, all of those things, any or all of them could be exempted from operation within the port city area. Now that was one of the arguments that we raised in the Supreme Court. So we need to distinguish between Hambantota Port and the Colombo Port City Bill that we are just arguing now, or we just concluded arguing now.
No, I totally understand, and I'm apprised, and I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I have absolute clarity in understanding this. The Hambantota Port is a different project, but what is happening now is that the Chinese have a presence on both sides of the Sri Lankan coast. So on one side towards Batticaloa and Trinco, that side is the Hambantota port, and on this side you have Colombo and the Colombo port city, where again the Chinese have a certain presence now. Now there are also news articles which have come to the fore which say that areas like the Colombo fort and some of the other heritage buildings will also, the plan is to sell it off or to give control of the operations and running to Chinese backed firms. So clearly the presence of the Chinese and their influence on Sri Lanka is only growing, is only increasing. I'm just going to bring in some of our other panelists and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Varnasuri. Let's try and understand, because the bill is now passed. We've also studied the bill, and there are panelists who've studied the bill, and it is causing a lot of concern what the Chinese are doing on both sides of Sri Lanka. Ambassador Parthasarathi. So there were arguments before the bill, there was opposition before the bill. Now that bill has been passed, it's come into play. It just looks like the Chinese are now going to toy with the Sri Lankan authorities and the government there.
Let me tell you, this controversy started about Colombo in 2014, when rather brazenly the then Rajapaksa government allowed a submarine to berth along with an escorting vessel in Colombo, when this discussion on this was started. So we certainly saw a military element in it, and interestingly it became an election issue, and a year later Mr. Rajapaksa was voted out of office. So I think there is a history to this. Now, very clearly to us, berthing of Chinese vessels in Sri Lankan ports will be unacceptable. Therefore, they have gone around this with this formula for the port city. The port city, the eastern port city, is really, as you say, will slowly become a Chinese enclave. That's what the Chinese have done everywhere that they've gone, including in Gwadar in Pakistan. If you see, Pakistan does not run Gwadar port. For all notionally, yes, but for all practical purposes, the Chinese call the shots. Now, Pakistan can go its own way, but for Sri Lanka, will be playing with, I'm afraid, fire. Because the Indian project which was to come here was funded not just by India, it was a joint Indo-Japanese project. And for a reason, it did not go through, despite the fact, especially after the Sirisena government came. The first thing Mr. Rajapaksa does after coming back to power is to revive this. Has he forgotten the background under which we objected? So I think this needs to be taken up diplomatically with the Sri Lankan government, because I must say one thing. I found in my visits to Sri Lanka, and I am a member of the India-Sri Lanka Foundation, there is a lot of respect for Mr. Modi. and they will be very careful in dealing with him. What they have done is offer us a Western harbor terminal. Now, oddly enough, they didn't approach us. They negotiated it with a private Indian company. Now, for us, it was to be an Indo-Japanese project. And there was a strategic reason for that, that they have to take a choice between China or a choice of India and Japan together. And therefore, how we will react to what they have done, in their so-called West Colombo project, we'll have to wait and see, because it'll have to, whatever happens, will have to be done in consultation with this government, with the Japanese government. The fact that they have gone about this in this manner, well, I'm sure Mr. Rajapaksa is, and the younger Rajapaksa, who was Defense Secretary at that time, is now the President, who really calls the shots in foreign policy, will bear this in mind. I mean, notional things like we're giving you a Western, we're giving it to an Indian company, this is all very fine. But what exactly is this Chinese facility for? How much of your sovereignty have added? This is after Hambantota, when there was huge pressure, which finally led to the Chinese leaving. And now there is talk of their handing over control to China. So I think both the Japanese and India will have to make it very clear, because they are not on these issues taking on just China. Just remember, they seem to have forgotten that India is a member of a Quad. And that is not just for military reasons. The Quad is for strategic reasons. So I would think that this has to be discussed with them, precisely the terms. Because as I said, saying that no, we're offering India, yeah, fine. But that is something not involving the government of India. That's what we said when it happened. So if there are further negotiations, and if Indian government is agreeable to something, fine. But handing over two of their major ports, Hambantota, which is really the constituency of President Rajapaksa, and this port, is a matter of concern. But as I said, we do have good official links with them. Foreign Minister Jaishankar has served there in difficult times. So I'm sure they will learn that they should not be playing games with us. They have gone ahead with this, fine.
Ambassador Parthasarathy, the fact is that there is a huge economic consideration, Ambassador Parthasarathy, which the Sri Lankans just cannot overlook, because there is a huge amount of money the Chinese have already invested, and there was huge amount of pressure on Mahinda Rajapaksa. I know very well, because I have friends in Sri Lanka, I've lived there, how much it was Mahinda Rajapaksa's dream to develop his constituency. Hambantota is his constituency. Namal Rajapaksa, his son, and a lot of the members of the Rajapaksa family hail from there, and they fight elections there, and they had made a promise to that region that they will develop it. So that was with the dream which started. But then at that time, nobody knew the Chinese intent is very, very nefarious. It's not a country or an entity that is going to invest in a nation or help a nation so that that nation can grow. It will be done only with the intent that that nation becomes eventually a vassal state. Now, there are many people who are watching the broadcast and who are saying, why didn't you call us for this show? We want to talk about it. And I assure them, with all humility, thank you for the keenness to show, that you want to join the show, and we will take this forward, because this has multiple implications. As I bring in Dr. Tara Karta and also General Katoch and Andrew, one of our viewers has just said, see, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and next Afghanistan once the US move out. These are the states which the Chinese are already controlling in this entire region. And if you are able to visualize it, you have the road on top around us, and the sea routes to control the Indo-Pacific. And they're now going to get all the more aggressive. They also have Djibouti on the African coast, right at the tip. So they have Djibouti, Gwadar, Port Qasim, and then the Budu and the Bundal Islands, which already Imran Khan has sold off to them. It's only 25 hectare area, but it's very, very close off the coast of Karachi, very, very close to the Indian zones. And their submarines can dock there. They can make a missile tub. They actually want They have control over those two islands. Pakistan has no jurisdiction. The Sindh government and the people of Sindh have been up at arms because of that. So there's so much that's happening that we have to understand the strategic implication for this entire region and the Chinese expansionist intent. Dr. Tara Karta.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I come in?
Yes, please.
I think one of the main things is that, considering Sri Lanka is a sovereign nation, right? It can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. That's given that. What is surprising to me in this issue is that it got the backing of 148 legislators in parliament. I mean, where is Sri Lanka's own, sense of not wanting to have one country dominating its entire economy? So that to me was surprising. Second is the fact that apparently there are no protests. I mean, nothing of the kind that we saw when the East Container Terminal had been announced, the labor unions. There were a whole lot of them who were out on the streets. That looks to me like a lot of money being spent somewhere. That is the main thing. And third is the fact that Sri Lanka had cancelled not just the East Container Terminal, they also challenged this Millennium Challenge Compact with the US. That also has been negated. So it seems like they are shutting off all doors and just letting in the Chinese. But having said that, we have to see that the Chinese are using this point of terrible pandemic very well. At this point, I think Sri Lanka was supposed to go to the IMF. His request for emergency funding was pending. It has a balance of payments crisis. So all this comes at a very convenient time for China. Because they had also looked for this thing, currency support from us, which we refused once the ECT was cancelled. And thereafter, of course, the pandemic came and everything went for a six. So the IMF loan is on hold because of Sri Lanka's own economic crisis within. So to me, it is China taking full advantage of the pandemic and pushing this through at a time when we are engaged with something else. So, which again leads me to wonder how and why the Wuhan crisis took place at all. I mean, I'm back to that whole conspiracy theory because it's worked out very well for China.
Right.
So, and there are also, I mean, I don't want to point fingers, but there are also rumors about state ministers' sons who've been employed by Chinese firms. So they have worked their way into the system and swooped in at a correct time. I mean, this bill has been rushed through, as our Sri Lankan colleague was saying, has been rushed through at a time of pandemic. So there are these curious factors. Only 58 people opposed it. That to me is it's really surprising. And there are spate of petitions in the court, including theirs, who are challenges. There are sensible people saying, let's not do this. Let's not give China such a huge hold over that entire coastline, as the previous, as Ambassador Parthasarathy had pointed out. Yeah. It's a very, very damaging thing for India. I'll stop there.
Well, it's not just damaging for India. I have a serious concern whether the Sri Lankans are understanding, and somebody who's such a proud Sri Lankan in Mahinda Rajapaksa is understanding the net impact or the long-term impact of what this can have even on the Sri Lankan people. Yes, it's a regional security issue and we are looking at it from an India perspective, but I have lived in Sri Lanka, so that's why I'm also concerned with what is going to happen with Sri Lanka itself. Will it be reduced to a nation which will have to do the will and beg, which will have to be perennially at the beck and call of the Chinese, and there is no escaping that grasp now? That's the serious concern which is top of mind for me, because more information, and Karthik Chopra watching the broadcast, Padmarao Sundarji watching the broadcast, plenty of information that is coming through from our research team also. The Chinese company CNPC are supposed to build a 4 million MTPA petroleum refinery in Hambantota Special Economic Zone. One of the other areas which they now control in the region is the Port Duqm in Oman. So there is a lot of concern into the footprint and the level to which the Chinese are going to enter. For China, well, this is their business. When they loan somebody money and if you cannot pay it, you give me land. That's how it is. But General Katoch, why is it that the Sri Lankans knowingly are doing this? Or is it that they are now pushed to the wall? They have no other choice because they've walked into the trap and they're now sucked into this quicksand.
Anand, no, I think the Sri Lankans were fully aware of what they were doing. And I really don't buy the argument that, they were ensnared. I think they wanted to be ensnared because there is a very insidious element within China, which I would like to state openly and publicly. The Chinese, when they do any such project, they bribe their way through. They look at key officials and they bribe them. They bribe them very handsomely. And I won't be surprised if it extends to political leaderships also, though this, of course, I'm not commenting on the present situation. But for the Chinese, they have done this earlier and they will continue to do so. So all the people who are in position in power, they will bribe them and get their way. Now, I think there are something which are very interesting which are happening here. If you look at Indian history and you look at how India was dominated, you find it came on the trade route. And once trade entered into India, when the foreigners started trade, it was followed by the flag. That means the military followed the trade to protect their interests. Now here we are seeing a similar thing with the BRI, and the Sri Lankan being part of it. The Chinese military involvement in this region is only going to grow. Now there are two aspects to it. One is Hambantota, which I will take separately, and the second is the port city, which is a separate issue. Now, my concern is really with both, because both have military implications. Now, as far as Hambantota port is concerned, 2 to 3 years back, we have had interaction with both with the Sri Lankan president and with the Sri Lankan Prime Minister in Colombo. And very specifically, they said at that point of time, that is the previous dispensation, that there will be no entry of Chinese warships into Hambantota. Now, they said that, they made it very clear, very, very explicit. But you see, things don't work that way. What is going to happen within 10 to 15 years when these people have total control? It will become a vassal state. I've got absolutely no doubts about it. So you are going to find the presence of Chinese warships in Hambantota. And that is going to pose a very serious threat to us. That is one. Now when we come to the port city. Now the port city is touted as an economic project and 62 hectares, 153 acres of reclaimed land. And they're going to put in casinos and other economic incentives, etc., etc. Okay, leave that aside. Who is going to get that money? Not the Sri Lankans. The Chinese will get the money, as has been the experience all over the world. So the Chinese have as of now, put in $1.4 billion, but the Chinese are going to extract a pound of flesh. Now, where do our security concerns come in? Because this is simply less than 300 kilometers from India, from Kanyakumari. Now, what happens? They are in a position now to put up listening devices, to put up radars, etc., to monitor our movements. And I think that constitutes a very serious threat as far as we are concerned. So now they are in Hambantota and they are also in Colombo. We have to take this seriously. Please remember, Anand, India had no land or maritime borders with China till China occupied Tibet. And once they occupied Tibet in the early, at the early 50s, for the first time we had a land border with China. Now they have come up to Hambantota and to the port city in Colombo, and we have for the first time a maritime, a very close maritime border, in a sense, with China. Now, this is going to cause huge security implications for us. One, it is going to cause huge security implications for the Sri Lankans too. Just the vast public may not know it yet because various elements in the political and administrative leadership would have been taken on board and bribed. I'm not saying who, but that is the way the Chinese operate. Correct. Right? And so they are all going to vote for it because for their immediate interest, they are willing to sacrifice Sri Lanka's national security concerns. That is going to be the larger danger for us. There's one more point which I wanted to state.
Before I bring in Andrew K. Pilium, General Saab, I'll just come back. I want to go back to Mr. Varnasurya and understand this. Mr. Varnasurya, as a Sri Lankan citizen, and also as a thinking national individual, has this is the Sri Lankan polity and other Sri Lankan people aware of the Chinese designs and the growing footprint? Are they
Yeah.
okay with signages in Tamil and Sinhala being replaced with Mandarin? And the concerns which are being generated, which are saying these are not immediate, it's not going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years. The CCP's plan is always long term, and they are willing to wait. And they will wait. If they waited 6 years for this clearance to happen, they will wait another 10 years or 15 years. But then thereafter, what happens?
Yes, thank you, Anand. In fact, I was trying to come in with a comment. I believe I'm far outnumbered by my Indian colleagues,
Yeah.
but I do appreciate the concerns. I do appreciate the concerns, particularly the strategic and security concerns raised by my Indian colleagues. But may I just clarify a few things, because it is I'm
Yes,
unfortunately the only Sri Lankan here. Yes, we value our sovereignty a lot.
No, sir. Fortunately, you are there with us. Frankly, sir, I'm very glad that you've agreed, because we
Yes.
want to understand the perspective, the
Yes.
Sri Lankan perspective, because
I
this is a
understand.
concern you're seeing
And
from the Indian perspective. I've got Andrew
Yes.
there who would bring in the Chinese perspective, but I just wanted to
Thank
come back to you, because I saw you
but just
wanting
give
to
me-
come
just give
in
me
and
3 minutes.
clarify a few things. Please go ahead.
Just give me 3 to 4 minutes. I just want to clarify a few more. You see, continuously throughout our history, let it not be misunderstood. We have always realized, and we live in realization of our geopolitical presence under the subcontinent. We are, whether we like it or not, we must look at India as an elder brother who has always guided us, and that has never been beyond our foreign policy. We must realize that. And also, I mean, we go back to the Mauryan dynasty, from when the Emperor Ashoka sent in Buddhism to Sri Lanka. Our history goes that far. So we are certainly not in oblivion now. However, yes, I understand your concern, because throughout our geopolitical presence, there has always been this strategic balancing that Sri Lanka has done between our interest with our elder brother India, right next to us, and also China, because remember, consistent Sri Lankan governments, in particularly leftist governments, have always had this inclination to lean on China a bit more than the Western bloc. So we've always had this balancing done very well. If you look at the Seema Shastri Pact, that was done immediately. There was the rice rubber agreement that Madam Sirima Bandaranaike did with China. So the balancing had been done very well. I know that from what the concerns that you raised now, it appears that there are serious concerns, that we are only tilting one way and we are not balancing our interest. And that's appreciated. Your concerns are appreciated. But I must correct something. As sovereign Sri Lankans, we are certainly not going to be enslaved. We may be small as a nation, but as Prime Minister Bandaranaike said once, we are armed to the hilt. We will not take kindly to anyone trying to overpower our sovereignty. That is the long and short of it. Sri Lankans are very proud people when it comes to our sovereignty, and we are not going to be enslaved. Yes, people may try by various economic means to do that, but all is not lost. That's what I say. I think one of the gentlemen, one of our erudite panelists said, diplomatically there is still a lot to be done, and I do believe that is the way forward. Diplomacy is the way forward in this sort of scenario. And one more comment on that parliamentary majority. The good lady made the point. Unfortunately, all of us in Asia know that when a parliamentary majority is garnered by a government, how often does a government member vote against their government? You tell me, whether it happens in India or elsewhere. When a president is the head of your government, and that government is headed by a certain executive branch that is led by the cabinet, which brings a policy, which young member or which new member of that parliament is going to stand and say, no, I oppose the Port City bill? That's not reality. That's not how it happens. Unfortunately, the present parliament, the government holds, I mean, in the previous election, if you all know your history, I was on the opposing side. And therefore, the present parliament has a more than 2/3 majority when you put the concomitant parties together. So therefore, it was a clean sailing, and therefore, perhaps it's unfair to say that only 48 members stood against it, because remember, there's only 48 in opposition, or just thereabout. So the majority is the government. That's a reality that we're facing with. And unfortunately, unlike earlier, we couldn't come onto the streets or do protests because COVID-19 prevents us. And that was why we kept on saying, even in court when we argued, why the rush? Why this sudden rush? Surely Port City is not going to be put up tomorrow. Let's have a wider discussion, a wider public debate. Let's open the fora for engagement And so we are still very concerned about our sovereignty. And I do once again stress the point that we are very, very concerned about the concerns expressed by our Indian colleagues. We are well mindful of it.
Right. No, I think you've summarized it and summed it up very well, but that's where the concern is. Concern is nations believe that they can defend their sovereignty and they can stand up, but China's comprehensive national power strategy has multiple folds, and I think the economic wing coupled with the cultural, ethno-culturalism which they will try and impose, and then the military power that they will bring is too much for nations to even stand up to. We've seen this happen. Look at Pakistan today, it just can't do anything. Look at Djibouti. Where are they? And China is a master at doing this. Ambassador Parthasarathi, I know you have to leave. If I may please request you, because I want to bring in Andrew and then I want to come back to you for a quick comment. If you can spare us 5 more minutes, please.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Andrew, you know, the perspective from the way China looks at it. Is this an expansionist design or is it purely trade? Or is China going to continue with it? Because nations are feeling threatened and nations will be subjected to and perhaps now feel that they are vassal states of the Chinese authorities and the Chinese government.
Well, Sri Lanka is a sovereign country. It's not a vassal state of any nation, not China, not India. But as far as this port is concerned, there are a number of reasons. And in fact, there's a long history that the port was developed, in fact, firstly by a European company, and then China later on took over the project. The reason why China was interested in this port is because of, naturally, it's part of China's maritime Silk Road, a part of the Belt and Road. And China, of course, strategically wants to capitalize on this centrality in the global supply and value chain. And of course, the ports are a very important part of it, including Sri Lanka, including Guyana, including Djibouti, including the Greek port, which is now turning into a vibrant port and earning a great deal of money after China took it over and managed it. And that's the reason why Sri Lanka government is interested in it, because in addition to the port, it brings along all the container cargoes. And of course, China dominates the world in container shipping. So there is a great deal of economic benefits. Let's be fair, because China is not doing this as something against India. In fact, India features a very, very small part in China's overall chessboard. So you've got to look at it from China's point of view. It's part of China's global Belt and Road. Is economic, is connectivity, is supply chains. Of course, at the end of the day, China would grow its influence and power. And all countries want to do that. But it doesn't mean that China necessarily want to send boots on the ground or to occupy any territory. Now, you mentioned Djibouti. Let's also a very interesting example, because Djibouti, before the Chinese came, America has got a station there, and Japan has got another military station there, and I think France has got it there as well. So I think that, as in case of Sri Lanka, obviously Sri Lanka is a sovereign country. It welcomes investments not only from China, but from other countries. But I like my colleagues, I understand the concern. I understand that there is a lot of looking at it from the strategic point of view, from the India-China rivalry, and so on and so forth. But that's not the story. In fact, you've got to look at it from why China is doing it in the first place.
This is the very interesting. Always great to have you on the panel, and apologies for coming to you towards the end, but that was because to understand this perspective from the CCP or from the Chinese perspective is that they are going to go about and do this because it's in their interest. Now, other nations have to look at it and say, how is it that we are going to survive and how is it we're going to protect our interests? Ambassador Parthasarathi, I'm way over time, but the final minute to you, sir.
Well, I would, when letting the Chinese in, followed by their navy, I think the Sri Lankans should remember their own history. When in the 15th century, Admiral Zheng He of China caused havoc within Sri Lanka and took people prisoners, including some rulers. But coming back more to the present time, I think this has to be addressed diplomatically. Sri Lanka is a friendly country, but it has put itself in a position whereby it would be earning the wrath of not just India, but also Japan. You have to take your choice on that. But as I said, a normal project by China, no worries. But two of the major ports of the country being handed over to China virtually, please believe me that we know the Chinese are given to what we call as salami slicing of territory. They try it regularly in India, don't always succeed. And we would caution you that you seem to be headed for their effort to salami slice your major port cities.
Right.
And please do watch out, because they have a history of doing this. It's written in their history. I go back to Admiral Zheng He in this famous raids of Sri Lanka. But with India, I think both your president and prime minister.
Ambassador Saab, sorry, I'm way over time. I'm way over
Modi.
time tonight. But to all my panelists, thank you very much. We will take this discussion forward, and I request Mr. Varna Surya also to join us in the future. Great getting the Sri Lankan perspective, and great having him on the panel. Thank you to all our panelists. Quick tip check of the coup poll of the day. 96% of the respondents believe China's expansionism is taking root with Hambantota. Tota. Thank you very much for participating in the poll and in debate number 1. We're going to take a short break. We hit the right note with UB40 when we come back. Stay with us.